great. It's fantastic. I love it.
This is Sam Does Arts, and basically if you are in the art YouTube space, then you know who he is. There's really no introduction needed, unless you've been living under a rock. We're talking to you, Patrick. But if you don't know, he is this amazing artist that created this, and this. I know, right? And if you're like me, you probably wondered, how do you draw like Sam Does Art? And here's how you don't do it. You grab a reference photo, you grab a style reference photo, and then you try to get straight to drawing and you draw hot garbage. Well, fear not, art babies, as Sam would call you. I found Sam's journal, and I'm gonna tell you all of his secrets. Dear diary, Jessica came to talk to me, but I had just finished picking my nose, and I had a booger on my finger. But to play it off, I stretched and scratched the back of my head, placing the booger in the back of my neck. And then I forgot about it. I spent all day with the booger in the back of my neck. Wait a second. This is my journal. Step 1 is research. And I know you don't want to do all that work, so I did it for you. Lazy. Sam has this video, how to draw faces, beginner friendly. In this video, he talks about the important measurements that you need to draw a face. Like the 3 horizontal guidelines that you use to kind of get everything where it needs to be. Like the hairline, the brow line, and the nose line, which are typically equal distances apart. Now, that's not a rule. There are some people that have different measurements. Some people have bigger foreheads, and that's okay. But typically you want those equal distance. Then he goes into further detail, like finding the eye line and where the mouth would be. And he explains every step in detail. He even shows you a finished sketch using these measurements, so study that and copy that and practice that. I myself followed that video a few times, and I used references from Sam and references from Disney's Rapunzel because he uses kinda Disney-like proportions in his characters. So look at this Rapunzel character sheet. Can you see some Sam in there? I do, in particular with those really big, really expressive eyes. You can continue your research phase by watching his many other videos. I know I have, but you don't have to stop there. He also has a Patreon where he posts tutorials on a regular basis. And those tutorials tend to be more detailed than the videos that he posts on YouTube. And the subjects he teaches on his Patreon, he doesn't always cover on his YouTube channel, so you might want to look into that as well. It's very informative. But if you can't commit to a monthly charge on his Patreon, he also posts his tutorials on Gumroad. And I bought one, but more on that later. Moving on to references. Sam loves his references, as we all should. While he probably could draw from his imagination, and he has in some videos, he loves a good reference. And he doesn't just pick a random photo that he just Googled up. He oftentimes uses a reference with a pretty girl and dynamic lighting. And I know what you're thinking, oh, but Aunt, where are we supposed to find photos like that? Settle down, art babies, I got you. If you want to keep it old school, you could look at fashion magazines. Some of you don't even know what a fashion magazine is. I'm old. But there are also many websites that you can choose from, like Pexels. Pexels has a lot of royalty-free images and videos that you can choose from. But my favorite website to get references from, and like many others, is Pinterest. The key to finding a reference that is worthy of Sam Does Arts is finding one that looks artsy and finding one with awesome lighting. Now there are a lot of photos to choose from and it could be pretty overwhelming. So I scrolled and scrolled and scrolled and I couldn't decide. So I just picked a random photo that I liked. And I know what you're thinking again. Oh, but Aunt, that lighting doesn't look very dynamic. And I say, shut up. I'm just kidding, but I will exaggerate the lighting later. I start drawing using what I learned from Sam's How to Draw Faces videos and also what I learned from the tutorials that he has on Gumroad. I want to make sure I get that spacing correct because that is key to capturing Sam's style. One thing I want to point out is that I use the liquefy tool a lot. Sam himself uses this tool as well. Also, don't forget to flip your canvas. This helps you see mistakes that you wouldn't otherwise see. And I want to point out that I am also using Sam Does Art's brushes. That came with his tutorial that I bought off of Gumroad. It came with 3 video tutorials, some high resolution JPEGs, and this amazing brush pack. Now you don't necessarily need the brush pack to draw like Sam. Actually, he also states this himself. These tools are just there to help you. He oftentimes just uses the round brush. It's not the brush that makes the artist. But with that said, I want to point out that I love Sam's sketchy brush. I try to capture the reference as much as I can, but I do want to say you should probably change your references a little bit, because if you draw the same reference as somebody else, your image could look very similar. So don't be afraid to change your reference. But for the exercise that I'm doing here, I'm just gonna try to capture the references I can. One thing that I wish I would have changed is the angle of her neck though. I just don't like that angle of it resting on her shoulder. So if there's something about your reference that you absolutely love and you wanna use that reference, but there's something that you absolutely hate, just change it. It's okay. You don't have to be tied down to the reference. I know some of you probably have commitment issues anyway. When I'm done with the sketch, it's time to add the background. Yes, you heard that right. The background comes before you start coloring and rendering. This step is very important because it allows you to see how the character will interact with the scenery around them. If there's a light source in your scenery that is on the side of them, then you know the light should be on the side of them and the shadows should be on the other side. You also could see if there's anything in the scene that would be casting a shadow on the character or reflecting light onto the character from a different angle. So make your sketch a multiply layer so that it doesn't get lost in all the colors of the background. I finished my background and this is where I get out of my comfort zone. I usually work with inks, which means I outline my sketch with a black pen. I usually change the color of the black lines at the end of the process, but still I use outlines. Sam does not. In fact, his art is usually lineless art, with a slight exception, but we'll get to that later. I never really feel comfortable doing lineless art. Sometimes I get lucky and something comes out decent, but for the most part, it ends in disaster. I use the lasso tool and I go around the sketch lines that I already have, selecting the entire sketch. I drop in a base color. For this one, I use what I think her skin color should be, and I lock the pixels. And again, I'm out of my comfort zone because I use millions of layers. Sam does not. He uses very little layers. He paints on one layer and sometimes uses another layer when he needs extra detail. In my normal workflow, I would usually put the skin on one layer, the hair color on one layer, the shirt color on one layer, and anything else that needs to be separated that would be a different color. But I can't do that this time because Sam puts all of his base colors on one layer. So I have to be very careful not to get out of the lines, but locking the pixels does help. But before I start rendering, I kind of make the colors a little bit more saturated. I feel like Sam is not afraid to have some saturated colors on there. But don't go too crazy with this because it could ruin your artwork. So I start rendering and I'm having a lot of trouble because I don't usually render like this. I use cell shading and I separate every cell shaded area into a separate layer. So if I make a mistake, I could just delete the layer and start again. So yes, I start painting because, well, no cell shading, and I start to add some lighting, and remember I said I was gonna exaggerate it, so I want it very bright on the side of her face. And at this point, I am not happy. I reach a point of disappointment, a point of discouragement. I hate this drawing. Sometimes there comes a part in your artwork that it looks a mess. You hate the artwork and you don't want to look at it anymore, and you definitely don't want anyone else to see it. So you have two choices. Choice one, you quit, you give up. You delete the image or you just save it onto your computer in a folder that you will never open and it's gonna be lost, never to be seen again. Or you trust the process. I push past all the negativity and my negative thoughts and I continue painting. I move on to drawing the eyes, painting in the eyes and adding some eyelashes. This makes the character look more like a, well, finished character. She needs her eyebrows, her lips, and she's starting to look better. Trust the process. I also add my favorite thing, which is highlights, spelled A-A-H. And I know that's spelled wrong, but it's an acronym and it stands for awesome highlights. That second A is another word that YouTube doesn't like, but it means the same thing as. For some reason, these highlights breathe life into your character. It gives your character soul. The further I go into this artwork, the happier I get. One, because it's starting to look better, and two, because I didn't quit. I never gave up. I add some hair strands and that helps the piece look even more complete. Now I mentioned earlier that Sam does not use line art and I sort of lied. I know, I know, I'm sorry. While he doesn't really use inking, he kind of leaves his sketch in the drawing. Only in some places, so I'm gonna try and do the same thing. I'm gonna erase most of the sketch, but in some places it helps your rendering. Instead of rendering and rendering and rendering and continuously painting the space between the neck and the chin, you could just leave your sketch line in and it kind of separates it for you. You don't need the rendering to help separate it. I also have these lines that I left on the armpits and the lines for the nose. Now for finishing touches, Sam likes to put tattoos in his characters, so I'm gonna add a tattoo. Now he oftentimes just uses squiggly lines. Don't go too crazy with it, you don't want it to look a mess, but you know, get squiggly. Sorry about that. Sometimes you just need to squiggle. Sam also has a trick for painting jewelry where you just add a line on a separate layer, lock those pixels, and then use a lighter color for some highlights and a darker color for some shadows, and just paint in some areas and don't paint in others. The key is getting those variation of colors to give it more of that shiny jewelry look. And the last step to capture Sam's style is the halftones and cross hatching. This is a style popularized by Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and, well, by Sam. I make a new layer on top of everything and I just paint in the halftones, try to stick it more to the highlights, and add the cross hatching more in the shadowed areas, but you can put it wherever you want. Just be careful not to make it too chaotic. I noticed that Sam sometimes even puts it on a overlay layer or a soft light layer or a glow dodge layer or color dodge layer. Do some experimenting and see which one you like the best. So I finished my Sam inspired artwork and I am very impressed with the results. When I started this piece, I didn't think that I was gonna 100% capture Sam's style, and I know I didn't. I noticed that in this piece that my style kind of peeks through here and there. And that's okay. I didn't do this to be Sam. I did this to help my artwork. I did this to practice and see what I can learn from his style and his work. You want your own artist identity in your artwork. Don't try to be an exact copy of anyone else. Stay true to who you are. And it's still okay to be inspired by other artists. I personally am inspired by Sam, and I'm grateful to Sam. But I'm also grateful to myself. I love my work, and if you love my work, I love you. But I did learn so much in the process, and I plan on keeping some of these things in my own process. Also, doing this gave me so much confidence because I didn't give up and I liked the results. I drew sorta like SamDoesArts, one of the art gods here on YouTube. I know I have a lot to learn, but still I want to thank you, Sam, for teaching us and teaching all of the art babies how to be, well, awesome. And if you like this sort of thing, you can watch this video right here. I do this kind of things all the time. I do art studies, art challenges, play art games, and do silly videos. I try to teach all I can to the other artists around the world. I love teaching other artists. I even have a how to draw page in my own children's book where I teach the young kids how to draw my favorite characters. And remember, I'm awesome. I think. Thanks for watching.